"Don't touch my baby. You're disgusting." Those words echoed through my daughter's living room, right in front of my son-in-law, and the baby I had waited years to meet, the baby I had spent years dreaming of as a grandfather. I stood frozen, my arms still suspended in the air. No one spoke. No one stopped it. I forced a faint smile, set the gift bag down on the table, turned around and walked out. What they didn't know was that in that exact moment, a decision formed in my mind. And it would change everything. If you're listening to this story, please leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from, what city or what state. A single like or share from you might help this story reach people who are in the same situation I was. My name is James. I'm in my 70s. In my entire life, I never imagined I would have to tell a story like this. I used to believe there were relationships that were permanent, untouchable. A bond between a father and a child was one of them. I lived with that belief for decades, until that afternoon, in the familiar living room of my daughter's house, when I realized that even the strongest-looking ties can rot quietly for years without us noticing. Emily is my only daughter. Her mother passed away early, before Emily was old enough to clearly remember her face. From that day on, in our small house in the suburbs of Ohio, it was just the two of us. I was a father, learning how to be a mother, a driver, a cook, the one who checked homework every night. I did everything I could so she wouldn't feel deprived, so she wouldn't feel less than any other child. I promised myself that no matter how hard life became, I would stand in front so she wouldn't have to endure it. When Emily grew up, left home for college, then got married, I thought I had fulfilled my role. I wasn't the kind of father who spoke sweet words, but I was always there. When she needed tuition money, I sent it. When she needed money for the wedding, I handled it. When she wanted to buy a house, I helped with the down payment. I never saw it as sacrifice. In my mind, it was simply what a father was supposed to do. Then Emily told me she was pregnant. I still remember that day clearly. I was sitting in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, when my phone vibrated. Her voice on the other end was shaking with emotion. I had to sit down because my heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. I thought maybe this was a late gift life was giving me. A grandchild, a new generation, a chance for our family to become closer after years of living separate lives. But things didn't turn out the way I imagined. After the baby was born, I wasn't invited to the hospital. Emily said she was tired, said she needed time to recover. I understood. I didn't push. I sent flowers, sent a card, texted a few lines to check in. The replies were so short they felt cold, but I reassured myself that maybe becoming a first-time mother was overwhelming. In the weeks that followed, I called many times. Each time, there was a different reason. The baby was sleeping. They were busy. The house was still a mess. They weren't ready for visitors. I started to feel something was off, but I tried to brush it aside. I didn't want to become that difficult old father who assumes his child is deliberately avoiding him. Until the day Emily said I could come visit. I prepared as if it were the biggest event of my life. I bought a soft blanket, a few small toys, chose the neatest sweater I owned. Driving to her house, I felt lighter than I had in months. I thought maybe all the misunderstandings were about to pass. Maybe once we saw each other, once we were in the same room, everything would be okay again. When Emily opened the door, I immediately sensed something was wrong. She didn't smile. There was no warmth in her eyes. But I made excuses for her, thinking maybe she was tired. Maybe the baby had cried all night. I stepped inside and saw the bassinet placed in the middle of the living room. My heart tightened. I walked closer, my voice dropping without me realizing it, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. Emily picked the baby up. I slowly reached my arms out, carefully, not daring to rush. I just wanted to hold my grandchild for a moment. Just a moment. Then those words came out. No shouting, no loss of control. Clear, cold, and loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. I looked into my daughter's eyes, searching for any sign that this was just a careless remark. But I saw nothing, only distance, guardedness, and something that felt like contempt. Daniel, my son-in-law, was standing nearby. He didn't say anything. He didn't step forward. He didn't object. He just stood there, as if this scene had already been accepted. His silence hurt me almost as much as my daughter's words. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't apologize either, because I didn't know what I had done wrong. I only felt a chill run down my spine. I set the gift bag on the table, forced a smile so thin I wasn't sure it even existed, then turned around and walked out. No one called after me. No one said a polite goodbye. The door closed behind me, softly and cruelly. Sitting in my car, I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, my hands resting on my lap, still feeling as if my arms were frozen mid-air. At that moment, I wasn't thinking about anger. I wasn't thinking about revenge. What I felt most clearly was the shattering of a belief I had carried my entire life. And in that silence, a cold thought began to form. I suddenly realized that maybe what she said that day wasn't impulsive. Maybe it was just the first time the disrespect that had been simmering for years was finally spoken out loud. I drove home feeling like someone who had just woken up from a bad dream. The familiar road felt longer than usual. Houses slid past the window like silent frames. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't want any voice to interrupt Emily's words still echoing in my head. When I got home, I opened the door, placed my keys on the small ceramic dish by the entrance, and stood there for a moment. The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator running and the clock ticking in the living room. Everything was in its place. The armchair where I read the newspaper, the floor lamp Emily's mother had chosen, an old photo on the shelf, me and Emily when she was about 6 years old, her hair tied up, smiling brightly after I lifted her onto my shoulders at a summer fair. I looked at that photo and suddenly remembered even earlier days, before Emily existed. I grew up in a small house with walls so thin that winter wind slipped through like needles. My parents weren't bad people. They worked themselves to exhaustion. But there was always a lack. Lack of money, lack of time, lack of even the simplest things. In our house, the most common answer to any request was, "We can't afford it." Not enough money for new shoes when the soles were worn down. Not enough money for a school field trip. Not enough money to fix the leaking roof right away, so my mother put a basin in the corner of the kitchen and told me to remember to empty it when it filled up. I don't blame them. But I remember the feeling. Watching other kids have ordinary things while I learned how to get by. I remember starting to work very young, not to buy candy or toys, but to contribute a little to the family. I delivered newspapers in the early morning before it was fully light. I washed cars at a gas station on weekends. I carried trays in a small diner, standing in a hot kitchen with my hands smelling of grease, just to bring home a few extra dollars. There were nights I came home so exhausted I just wanted to collapse into bed. But I still sat at the kitchen table, counting my small paycheck and putting it into an envelope. Even then, I thought I would never let my life repeat that endless cycle of not enough money. I wanted a life that could breathe. Then Emily came along. I still remember holding her in the hospital. She was tiny, pink, her eyes closed, wrapped in a white blanket. I looked at that little face and felt something in me lock into place. Or maybe open up, I still don't know. I only knew that I made a silent promise. She would not grow up hearing, "We can't afford it," the way I had. I said one sentence to myself, and it stayed with me throughout my entire life as a father. A father can be tired, but his child must not go without. From that day on, everything I did revolved around that promise. I worked as if my life were a tightrope, and if I loosened my grip, my child would fall. When people asked me about hobbies, I usually smiled and brushed it off. I used to like fixing cars, fishing, long drives, but those things slowly became luxuries. I took extra shifts. I worked longer hours. I accepted jobs others turned down because they were difficult or required staying late. I drove to work early in the morning and came home after dark. For a while, I worked 2 jobs at once, construction during the day, a warehouse at night. Some evenings I sat in my car in front of the house, resting my forehead on the steering wheel for a few minutes just to gather enough strength to walk inside and smile at my daughter. I didn't buy a new car until the old one nearly refused to run. I didn't travel. I didn't buy expensive things for myself. I got used to choosing cheaper options, using things longer, postponing what I wanted. Any extra money always went into accounts labeled with one word: Emily. Education fund, living expenses, emergency fund. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought that was love. I tried to be present in her life in the best way a quiet man like me knew how. I sat in the middle rows at school performances, clapping loudly, even when I didn't fully understand the song she was singing. I stood by the soccer field, watching her run, cheering until my voice went hoarse. I sat with her at the kitchen table every night, helping with math problems, correcting spelling mistakes, making her a warm glass of milk when she came home upset because someone teased her. I wasn't a perfect father, but I never quit, and because I never quit, I slowly taught her a habit I didn't recognize until much later. The habit of receiving without needing to ask back. When she needed something, I was there. When she wanted something, I found a way. When she was silent, I guessed and acted. I thought I was caring for her, but maybe I was also teaching her that my sacrifice was simply a given. I remember once, when Emily was little, she wanted a winter coat that her classmate had. I looked at the price and knew I'd need to work a few extra shifts to afford it. I did. I bought that coat and watched her spin in front of the mirror, her eyes lighting up. I was happy because she was happy. But I also remember that in that moment, she had no idea what it took for that coat to appear. She only knew it showed up, as if things in life were supposed to arrive on time. Now, sitting alone in my quiet house, I can finally see how that pattern stretched over many years. I laid the foundation with love, but I also laid it by erasing myself. I got used to standing behind, and maybe Emily got used to seeing me as part of the background, always there, not needing to be handled carefully. I stood up and went to the sink, turned on the water, washed my face, letting the cool stream pull me out of the numbness. When I looked up into the mirror, I saw a man older than I expected. Deep circles under the eyes, wrinkles at the corners of my mouth, hair thinning and turning gray with time. I looked at that man for a long moment and realized something simple but heavy. I had spent my entire life making sure my daughter never lacked anything, but I had never made sure my daughter knew how to value it. I don't blame Emily for everything. Everyone has weaknesses. I do too. I gave too much without boundaries. I believed love would automatically create respect. I thought that if I was good enough, selfless enough, my child would understand. But life doesn't work that way. Giving doesn't always produce gratitude. Sometimes it produces familiarity, to the point where people forget the value of what they're receiving. I went back to the living room and sat in the armchair. Late afternoon light slanted through the curtains, drawing long lines across the wooden floor. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. In my mind, Emily's words were no longer just a blade. They became a signpost, cold but clear. I understood that if I didn't change how I stood in my own life, I would continue to be treated as something that could be pushed aside at any moment. I didn't want to live the rest of my years like that. I wanted peace. I wanted respect, even if it came in the form of dignified silence. I exhaled slowly, as if releasing a heavy weight from my chest. Then I stood up, went into the kitchen, and made myself a fresh cup of coffee. My hands still trembled slightly, but my mind was clearer. I sat at the kitchen table where I had once helped Emily with homework, where I had once placed envelopes of wages, where I had once told myself that as long as my child didn't lack anything, everything would be fine. Now I knew that fine wasn't just about money. Fine was about respect, about boundaries, about recognizing that a father is also a human being, not a walking wallet. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter but real, and I let that truth slowly settle in my chest as something necessary, something I should have learned much earlier. That night, I didn't turn on all the lights in the house like I usually did. I left only the small lamp on the kitchen table, casting a soft yellow circle, enough to see the coffee cup and the wooden surface darkened by years. I sat for a long time, listening to the wind slip through the cracks, while memories surfaced on their own, not because I wanted them to, but because they needed to be remembered so I could understand how I got here. When Emily said she wanted to go to college, I was as happy as if she'd won the lottery. Not because I expected wealth, but because I knew she was stepping out of the narrow life we had known. I wanted her to have wider doors, more choices, a future I never had. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, holding the tuition bill, calculating every expense. Tuition, books, dorm fees, food, transportation. Emily was excited and nervous. She said softly, "If it's too hard, I can get a part-time job." I shook my head immediately. I didn't say much, just one sentence. "You focus on studying. I'll handle the rest." And I did. I took extra shifts. I sold a few things I had kept as memories, nothing valuable, just pieces of my younger years. I switched to an older car to lower payments. There were months I ate so simply that friends thought I was dieting. I didn't tell anyone, and I didn't tell Emily. I didn't want her walking into class feeling indebted. I wanted her to walk in with her head held high, knowing she belonged there. On graduation day, I was the one clapping the loudest. I sat in the middle row wearing a brand new shirt I'd bought just for that occasion. When Emily walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the lights hit her face, and time seemed to run backward. I saw the little girl with the high ponytail again, now a confident young woman with bright eyes and steady steps. I stood and clapped until my palms burned. I smiled with tears stinging my eyes. When people took photos, Emily hugged me quickly and turned back to her friends. I still felt full. I thought, she's grown up now. She has her own world, and that's normal. Not long after that, Emily brought Daniel home to meet me. Daniel was polite. He shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, spoke properly. He called me sir and smiled just enough. But there was something about him that always made me feel like I was standing on the outside. Not because he was rude, but because he always kept an invisible distance. Daniel didn't ask much. He wasn't curious about my life. He never stayed long to talk. He was like someone who knew how to behave correctly, but didn't really want to step in. I still tried. I invited him to dinner. I told a few old stories to keep things light. I asked about his work. Daniel answered briefly and politely, then often looked toward Emily, as if waiting for my daughter to carry the conversation forward. I told myself, maybe young men are just like that now, less open, busy, or simply from a different generation. When they talked about the wedding, Emily wanted a beautiful ceremony. She didn't demand anything overly extravagant, but beautiful still came with a price. I looked at my daughter, at that eager look in her eyes, and I nodded. I said I would cover most of it. I paid for the venue, the reception, the music, the flowers, the photography. I even contributed extra so they could take the honeymoon Emily had dreamed about for a long time. I told myself a woman only wears a wedding dress a few times in her life. I didn't want her to look back and feel it was lacking. On the wedding day, Emily was radiant. Daniel stood beside her. his hand resting lightly on her back, smiling at the guests. Everything looked like a perfect picture. I sat at the family table, raised my glass to toast them, listened to people say kind words. There was a moment when I turned and saw Emily looking at me from across the room. Our eyes met for just a second before she looked away. I didn't think much of it. I assumed she was busy, happy, pulled in many directions. A year later, they said they wanted to buy a house. I remember that call. Emily's voice sounded both excited and anxious, as if she were asking permission. The house prices in the area they wanted were higher than they had planned. Daniel said they could wait a few more years, but Emily wanted to settle sooner, wanted space for the future. I asked how much they were short for the down payment. Emily paused, then said the number. I didn't scold them. I didn't ask why they couldn't handle it themselves. I just said, "Let me see." I saw and I transferred the money. The day they got the keys, I went over. I stood in the empty living room, the smell of fresh paint and new wood mixing in the air. Emily ran from room to room, imagining where the sofa would go, where to hang pictures. Daniel measured things, talked about renovations, about the backyard. I sat down on the front steps, watching them, my heart feeling lighter. I thought, finally, my child has a foundation. Then, over time, small financial troubles began to appear, like grains of sand falling steadily. Once it was car repairs. Once it was a medical bill. Once they were tight because of a job change. I never noticed Emily calling just to check on me during normal times, but I noticed my phone lighting up regularly when they needed something. I helped again. I thought it was just a rough phase. I believed family helping each other was natural. But there was something strange. Every time I helped, I never heard the simplest question people usually ask when they call an older parent. "Are you okay, Dad? How's your health? Do you need anything?" It wasn't that I wanted flattery. I didn't need flowery words. I just needed to feel like I wasn't an ATM that got called when cash was required. And the longer it went on, the clearer it became. Emily's calls didn't start with, "How are you, Dad?" They started with, "Dad, I need..." One evening, after transferring money so they could pay a bill on time, I sat down in the armchair in the living room, staring out the dark window. I remember that feeling clearly. It wasn't anger, it was emptiness. I suddenly realized that for years I had always been behind the scenes, fixing what they broke, making everything okay again. And because I did it so well, they got used to not needing to see me anymore. I started noticing small signs of invisibility. Emily spoke to me more casually. On holidays, if I didn't reach out first, she sometimes forgot. When I visited, I felt like a guest who had arrived at the wrong time. Daniel remained polite, but his eyes often slid past me the way you glance at a chair in the room. I told myself not to be sensitive, not to be difficult, not to turn into a resentful old man. But deep down, one thought became clearer and clearer. I had spent money building steps for my child to climb, and then she stood on them and looked down at me as if I naturally belonged below. Even then, I didn't dare name that feeling. I only sensed that something had shifted in my daughter's family. Money, support, the familiar "Dad will handle it" had slowly replaced respect. And when someone grows used to receiving without looking back, they forget how to treat the giver with care. I sat under the thin yellow light, my cup of coffee long gone cold. I didn't blame Emily entirely, but I began to understand that maybe I had raised her with guarantees and unintentionally let her grow up in a very dangerous kind of security. The security that no matter what she did, Dad would be there, would fix it, would endure it. And now, after what she said in that living room, I was forced to face a truth I had avoided for far too long. After that night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind kept turning the pieces over, as if trying to prove something. I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the wind outside and the heating pipes clicking softly as the temperature changed. I had lived long enough to know that some truths don't arrive with a bang. They arrive quietly, over time, until one day you can no longer pretend you haven't seen them. And then, in the middle of all that heaviness, I remembered the moment Emily told me she was pregnant. I remembered how my heart had leapt like a child's. It was a spring afternoon. I had just finished mowing the lawn, the smell of fresh grass still clinging to my sleeves. I was washing my hands at the sink when my phone vibrated. When I saw Emily's name, I wiped my hands on a towel and answered faster than usual. Her voice sounded different, nervous and bright at the same time. "Dad," Emily said, then paused as if holding a secret for one more second. I smiled, thinking she was about to talk about a new house or a job change. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emily took a deep breath, then said, "I'm pregnant." I stood still. The water kept running. For a moment I didn't know how to react. I just felt my chest warm, something soft and glowing spreading through me. I turned off the faucet, leaned lightly against the counter to steady myself, then laughed as my eyes suddenly burned. "Really?" I asked, even though I had heard her clearly. Emily laughed. "Really? You're going to be a grandpa." Grandpa. Those two words sounded both strange and beautiful when they reached my ears. I had thought about that day for a long time, but only when it arrived did I understand its weight. It felt like my life was opening a new chapter, even though I was already near the end of the book. I congratulated her, asked if she was feeling okay, what the doctor said, how she was eating. Emily answered briefly, a bit rushed, as if the main point was simply delivering the news. I didn't mind. I was floating in a happiness no one could pull me down from. After I hung up, I walked around the house like someone who had just received wonderful news and didn't know where to put it. I opened the refrigerator and closed it. I stepped onto the porch and went back inside. Finally, I sat down in the armchair, looking out at the front yard, the wind moving gently through the trees. I imagined a stroller on the walkway. I imagined a tiny laugh in the living room. I imagined Emily holding her child and me standing beside her, not needing to do anything grand, just being there, witnessing that moment. The next day, I went to a baby store downtown, a place I hadn't stepped into since Emily was little. I walked between aisles filled with pastel colors, tiny hats and socks no bigger than 2 fingers. I stood there for a moment, my throat tightening in a strange way. I didn't buy much. I chose the softest things: a thin blanket, a few newborn outfits, a small stuffed bear. I didn't want to be seen as a grandparent who went overboard. I just wanted to begin, to mark my affection with a quiet message. I'm here. And I did one more thing I didn't tell anyone about. I opened a separate savings account and labeled it with my future grandchild's initials. At that time, I didn't know the gender, didn't know the name, but I knew this was a person who would grow up in this world. I transferred a small amount into it every month, as routinely as brushing my teeth, the same way I once set aside money for Emily's education. I imagined a day when my grandchild was old enough for me to say, "I'm not giving you the most expensive toy. I'm giving you an opportunity, a class, a book, an internship, something to help you stand more firmly." In the months that followed, whenever I passed a store, I found myself stopping to look. Just looking was enough to brighten my heart. I imagined Sunday dinners, the whole family around the table, the sound of spoons against plates, a baby babbling. I imagined the first birthday, a small cake and a single candle. I imagined myself sitting on the floor, clumsily stacking toy blocks just to make my grandchild laugh. I didn't need to be the most fun grandpa. I didn't need to know every new game. I just needed to be present. One evening, I called Emily to check in, my voice gentle, as if afraid of bothering her. She said she was tired, busy, but still shared a few things, like how the baby kicked in the mornings and what the doctor advised about her diet. I listened to every word like it was music. I smiled to myself in the kitchen like a foolishly happy man. I thought everything would be okay, that the distance would shrink. A child can soften sharp edges. I believed that, but at the same time, another thought appeared, quieter and more honest than any reassurance. I wasn't young anymore. I felt it when I stood up more slowly, when my knees ached as the weather turned cold, when I gripped the stair railing a little tighter. I didn't know how many years I had left. I didn't dare promise I would see my grandchild go to college or get married. I only hoped I had enough time for my grandchild to remember my voice, my hands, the feeling of having a grandpa who looked at them with gentle eyes. And I said something to Emily during one of our calls later, when she sounded like she was in a hurry to hang up. I spoke slowly, as if telling the truth to myself. I don't want to be a perfect grandpa. I just want to be there. Emily was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Yeah," very quickly, as if the sentence didn't require a response. I heard Daniel in the background, the sound of objects moving, cabinet doors opening and closing. The call ended shortly after, but I held on to my words like a key, because I believed that no matter how busy my daughter was, no matter how her life changed, I still deserved a small place in her family. Not because I gave money, but because I was her father, and because I had been there from the very beginning. I believed that firmly. So firmly that I never imagined that hope would be turned into humiliation right in the living room of my own daughter's house. After Emily gave birth, I thought everything would flow naturally. I pictured myself standing in a hospital hallway, holding a simple bouquet, my heart pounding like it had on Emily's graduation day. I didn't need noise or photos, just to see the baby, say congratulations, place a hand on my daughter's shoulder, and tell her she had done well. But that day never came. I learned Emily had gone into labor through a short text message, so brief I had to read it twice to be sure I wasn't imagining it. "I'm at the hospital. Everything's okay. I'll text later." That was all. No invitation, no room number, no, "Can you come, Dad?" Don. I stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, staring out the window at a pale gray sky like a blank page. I told myself she was in pain, in labor, unable to text much. I replied with a short message. "I'm here. Let me know if you need anything." The message was read, but there was no response. 2 days later, Emily texted, "The baby's here. We're both okay." That was it. I congratulated her, asked which hospital she was in, asked if I could stop by for a few minutes. Emily replied quickly, "Not yet, Dad. I'm tired. We'll talk when we're home." I read that line and felt my heart sink, but I nodded as if she could see me. I told myself everyone is exhausted after giving birth. Every new mother needs space. I didn't want to be difficult. I didn't want her to see me as a burden. I placed a bouquet and a card on the table, planning to bring them when she allowed me to visit. Days passed, the flowers wilted, like a symbol I didn't want to face. Eventually I threw them away but kept the unopened card, because I couldn't bring myself to throw my congratulations into the trash. The calls that followed were just like the first messages. Short, cold, always with a reason. When I called, Emily answered in a flat tone. "The baby's sleeping." "I'm feeding the baby." "Daniel's busy. The house is a mess." I said, "I just wanted to hear your voice." Emily replied, "Yeah, I know. I'll call you back." But the call back rarely came. I began counting days, not because I wanted control, but because I didn't understand why time felt so long. 1 week, 2 weeks, then a month. In that month, I hadn't seen my grandchild's face once, even though I lived less than an hour's drive from Emily's house. My friends were different. Frank from church showed photos of holding his grandchild right in the hospital, his eyes red with emotion. Marlene at the coffee shop showed a video of her grandchild laughing, saying her daughter sent one every day. I smiled and congratulated them. But when I went home, I sat alone and felt the room stretch in an uncomfortable way. not because I was jealous, but because I didn't understand what I had done wrong to be kept outside. I reassured myself. I told myself Emily was just stressed after giving birth. Hormones, lack of sleep, worrying about the baby. I read articles about postpartum depression, about the sensitivity of new mothers. I reminded myself, don't take it personally. Don't make it a big deal. Just wait a little longer. But some small things refused to fade. Emily didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't ask if I was eating properly. She didn't ask if I needed anything. If I didn't initiate, she could end a call in under a minute, as if I were calling a busy help desk. I started choosing my words carefully, sticking to safe topics, stepping lightly through every sentence so I wouldn't be seen as a nuisance. I never imagined I would one day talk to my own daughter the way I talk to a stranger. Once, I called in the afternoon. Emily answered, and I heard Daniel in the background. I couldn't make out his full words, but I could hear the tone. A sigh, a short, "Who is it?" Then Emily spoke more quietly, more quickly. "Dad, I'm busy. I'll call you later." I asked, "Is Daniel there? Let me say hello to my son-in-law." Emily paused, then replied, "He's working, Dad." I could clearly hear the television or some other noise in the house, footsteps passing by, a door closing. I didn't want to overthink it, but the atmosphere of the call suddenly changed, as if someone were standing right beside her, as if I were being listened to or judged. After that, whenever my calls lasted a little longer, I would hear Daniel's voice in the distance. And every time his presence appeared, Emily's tone became firmer, more hurried, as if she were trying to end the call quickly before someone grew irritated. I began to feel something that hurt more than anything else. I was no longer dad in my daughter's house. I was a factor that needed to be managed, something that could cause inconvenience. About 2 months after the birth, I decided I couldn't keep waiting in uncertainty. I called Emily and said I wanted to bring over some baby items I had bought a long time ago, just a few small things, and if she didn't want me inside, I could simply stand at the door, hand them over, and leave. I tried to keep my voice gentle, like a polite suggestion. Emily was silent longer than usual. Then she said, "We're really busy this week." I asked, "What about next week?" Emily let out a breath as if I had asked something annoying. "Let me see, Dad. I'll text you." I heard that, "Let me see," and felt like I had just asked for an appointment from someone who didn't really want to meet. I hung up and sat still, looking at my hands. A thought flashed through my mind, one I had never imagined would appear. I was having to ask permission to be a grandfather. That thought wasn't loud, but it stung. I had spent my entire life clearing a path for Emily. I had believed that being a father was something that didn't require an invitation. And now, to see my grandchild, I had to wait to be scheduled, to be considered, to wait for my daughter to get back to me. That evening, I walked around the house without doing anything in particular, just trying to shake off the sense of being out of place. I opened the drawer where I kept the baby items I had bought. The tiny clothes were still with their tags on. The soft blanket was still neatly folded. I touched the fabric, imagining my grandchild's skin, imagining that small breathing sound. My eyes burned. Not because I was weak, but because I was beginning to understand something frightening. This distance wasn't caused by busyness. It wasn't caused by exhaustion. It had the shape of intention. I had heard Emily hesitate too many times. I had heard the change in her voice whenever Daniel appeared in the background, and I began to suspect that the doors closing in front of me weren't being shut by Emily alone. Maybe it was a joint decision, an agreement inside that house where I no longer had a voice. I had no proof, only a feeling. But once that feeling took root, it grew quickly, and it made me look at everything with a different gaze, colder, clearer, even though I still tried to keep my heart soft, because I wanted to believe my daughter couldn't truly want to push me out of her life. I tried not to think about it anymore. The more I thought, the heavier my chest felt. I forced myself back into my daily routine, as if staying busy could dull the ache of waiting. In the mornings, I watered the plants, replaced a burnt-out light bulb in the hallway, stopped by the grocery store for a few small things. In the afternoons, I walked around the neighborhood, greeting neighbors who stood on their porches. When people asked about Emily and the baby, I just smiled and said, everything was fine. I didn't want to turn my family into gossip. I also didn't want to hear myself explain why I still hadn't met my grandchild. Then, one day, while I was standing in the kitchen, my phone buzzed on the table. Emily's name appeared. I stared at it a second longer than usual, as if blinking might make the call disappear. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad. Her voice that day was softer, closer to how it used to be. Not bright with joy, but not cold like before. She spoke quickly, as if she had rehearsed the words. Next week, can you come over? You can come see the baby. I had waited so long for that sentence that, for a brief moment, I didn't believe I had heard it correctly. I was silent. Emily spoke again, a little quieter. Can you come around 2 p.m.? My chest tightened, but with relief. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask why it had taken so long. I was afraid that if I asked, Emily's tone would change again, and the door would close once more. I just said, yes, I'll come. Thank you. I heard Emily exhale, as if she had just let something go, and then the call ended quickly. I stood there in the kitchen, phone still in my hand, as if the whole house had suddenly been lit up. That day, I walked back and forth through the living room without knowing what I was doing. I looked around the house, everything the same, yet everything felt different. I opened the drawer with the baby items, took out the soft blanket I had bought when Emily was still pregnant, laid it on the table, then folded it neatly again. I told myself, this time it's real. I'll see my grandchild. I'll hold my grandchild. I'll hear that tiny breathing close to me. All that week, I felt like someone counting each step of a staircase leading to a sacred place. I tried to act calm, but my mind kept circling back to the coming afternoon. I went out and bought one more small gift. Not too much, just a neutral-colored stuffed animal and a baby bib with simple lettering. I placed everything into a clean gift bag, arranging it carefully, as if the items could speak for my heart. I did something else that even I found a little ridiculous. I spent longer in front of the mirror. I shaved more carefully. I chose a wrinkle-free shirt and a dark-colored sweater Emily had given me for Father's Day a few years earlier. I wanted to look presentable, not to impress anyone, but because in my mind this was an important meeting. Meeting my grandchild, meeting a piece of my family's future, and also meeting my daughter again, the version of her I still wanted to believe was there. On the day of the visit, I woke up very early. I made coffee, but only drank a few sips before setting it down. I wasn't hungry. My stomach felt like a tight string. I sat in a chair, looked at the clock, then stood up and walked around the house, checking my keys, my wallet, the gift bag. Everything was ready. Still, I checked again, as if forgetting one small thing could ruin the entire visit. As the time approached, I carried the gift bag out to the car. The air outside was clear, the sunlight soft, the kind of light that makes you believe everything will be okay. I sat behind the steering wheel, rested my hands there for a moment, and let out a slow breath. I reminded myself not to bring my hurt feelings into my daughter's house. This was a happy day. I needed to make it a happy day. The drive to Emily's house wasn't far. I knew the route by heart, but that day, every turn felt longer. Every red light seemed to hold me back on purpose. I watched the traffic, watched families passing by, some with children in the back seats, laughter drifting through open windows. I suddenly felt smaller, like someone standing outside a painting I was supposed to belong to. Then I reassured myself again. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. Maybe Emily really had been exhausted. Maybe Daniel was just awkward in his manners. Maybe things weren't as serious as I feared. Maybe once I stepped inside and saw my grandchild, all the discomfort of the past months would dissolve like mist. When I stopped in front of the house, I sat still for a few seconds. That house was one I had helped them buy with the down payment. I remembered the day they got the keys, standing right on that same step, watching Emily smile. Today, the step was still there, but inside my chest was a strange feeling, half anticipation, half caution, as if I were about to enter a place where I was no longer sure I was welcome. I stepped out, adjusted the gift bag in my hand, and walked up the stone path. The front door was closed. I rang the bell. A few seconds passed, then the door opened. Emily stood there. She didn't smile. Her eyes scanned me, as if inspecting, not like the way they used to soften when she saw me. I forced a smile and said gently, "I'm here." Emily nodded and stepped back to let me in. I crossed the threshold. The house smelled of milk and freshly washed laundry, and of sleepless nights. I looked around, searching for a sign of the baby. My heart began to race when I saw a bassinet placed in the living room. I slowed my steps, afraid of making noise. I saw Daniel in the kitchen area, standing by the counter with a glass of water in his hand. He glanced at me briefly, then looked away. No greeting, no words, just a silent presence. Emily walked to the bassinet and bent down. I heard a soft rustle, fabric against fabric. Then she lifted the baby. I saw a tiny head wrapped in a blanket, a small pink face with eyes still closed. Everything inside me softened. I took a step forward, my voice dropping naturally, as if the whole room might shatter if I spoke too loudly. "Hello, little one," I whispered, not knowing if my grandchild could hear me or not. "Grandpa's here." I reached out my hands very slowly, very carefully. I didn't rush. I just wanted to hold my grandchild once, just once, to know that feeling was real. Emily looked at me. Her eyes were still strangely cold. I stood there with my arms outstretched, waiting for a nod, a step forward, something gentle. And just as I was about to touch the blanket wrapped around the baby, Emily stepped back. Then another step. Her movement wasn't hurried, but it was firm, like someone who had decided beforehand. The baby kept sleeping, that tiny face pressed against her chest, breathing thin as a thread. I stood there, my arms still raised, unsure whether to continue or pull back. I tried to smile, to lighten the moment, the way I had done my whole life whenever things grew tense in the family. "I just want to hold the baby for a moment," I said very softly. My voice trembled, not from weakness, but because the emotion was rising too fast. I washed my hands. I just want to feel my grandchild once. Hearing myself speak, I felt a strange sadness. I was explaining myself to my own daughter, as if I were a stranger asking to hold someone's baby in a park. I still tried to stay calm. I stayed where I was, didn't step closer, didn't apply pressure. I just held my arms out, waiting for permission. But Emily didn't nod. She looked at me, her gaze sharp and cold, nothing like the eyes of the little girl who used to wrap her arms around my neck on our front steps. Then, before I could understand what was happening, Emily spoke. Her voice wasn't loud enough to be a shout, but it was loud enough to cut through the room, clear enough that each word landed like a stone. "Don't touch my baby. Please step back." For a split second, I thought I had misheard. My mind refused to process the meaning of those words. I stood frozen, as if time had stretched. My arms were still suspended in the air, then slowly stiffened. I looked at Emily's face, waiting for a sign she would take it back, that she would say, "I'm sorry, I'm just stressed." But there was nothing. Her expression didn't waver. It wasn't an outburst. It wasn't accidental. It was a judgment. I heard blood rushing in my ears. I heard the hum of the air conditioner. I even heard the ticking of the wall clock in the living room, as if it were insisting this was real, not a dream. Instinctively, I turned to Daniel. I thought at least he would say something. Anything. That's too much. He just wants to hold the baby. I'm sorry, sir. Just one sign that I wasn't completely alone in that moment. But Daniel stood still. He leaned lightly against the counter, the glass still in his hand, his eyes fixed somewhere else. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Emily as if to stop her. His silence wasn't accidental. It was a quiet agreement. It made the words heavier, deeper, as if the entire house had signed off on pushing me away. You're disgusting. Those words repeated in my head, not because I wanted to remember them, but because they kept striking inside like knocks on a locked door. I had been misunderstood by strangers. I had been yelled at by bosses. I had heard harsh words in my life, but never did I think I would hear something like that from my own daughter, in the house I had helped her buy, in front of the baby I had waited so long to hold. I felt my chest hollow out. There was no burning anger, no explosion, just a cold spreading fast, starting in my throat, flooding my chest, sinking straight into my stomach like a stone dropping into water. I lowered my hands slowly, carefully, as if afraid of breaking something in the room. I didn't want to wake the baby. I didn't want my grandchild's first memory of me to be crying. I swallowed the lump in my throat and pulled a smile onto my face with what little strength I had left. A smile thin as paper. "Okay," I said, my voice hoarse. "All right." I placed the gift bag on the coffee table. I set it down so gently it made almost no sound. I didn't say anything else. I didn't ask why. I didn't argue. I knew if I spoke any more, I would break. And I didn't want to break there, in my daughter's living room, in front of my son-in-law and Emily's glass-cold stare. I turned and walked toward the door. No one followed me. No one called me back. No one said, "Wait a second." I opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt colder than I expected, even though it wasn't cold. It slapped my face like a reminder. I walked down the steps, across the stone path to my car. My legs kept moving, but it felt like part of me had been left behind, still standing in that living room with my arms suspended in the air. When I sat in the driver's seat, I didn't start the engine. I placed my hands on the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. The windshield reflected part of my face, older, pale, eyes drained of something important. I blinked once, then again, as if blinking enough times might make the scene disappear. "You're disgusting. You're disgusting." The words echoed in my head like sound in an empty room. They weren't just an insult. They were a blade cutting through something I had held my entire life. The belief that my love for my child was unconditional, that no matter what, I could always soften, always forgive, always tell myself, "That's my child." But in that moment, sitting alone in my car where no one in that house could see my face, I understood something I had avoided all my life. There is a line that even a father's love cannot cross and still keep its dignity. And I knew with painful clarity that something inside me had just ended. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a thread that had been stretched too long finally snapping, right at the point I had always believed was the strongest. I sat in the car for a long time, so long that I wasn't even sure what I was waiting for anymore. The clock on the dashboard ticked forward minute by minute, while outside people walked by. Dogs were being taken for walks. Laughter drifted from porches as if the world hadn't cracked at all. And I sat still, my hands resting on my thighs, feeling as if I had just been pushed out of my own family and the door had been locked behind me. I didn't cry. The tears welled up, but they didn't fall. Maybe because I was used to swallowing everything inside. Maybe because this blow wasn't like the ordinary hits life gives you. It didn't just hurt. It numbed. I looked through the windshield and saw that the front door of Emily's house was still closed. No one ran out to call me back. No one cracked the door open as if to say, "Dad, wait a moment." The house stood there, calm, tidy, clean, like a wall that had just declared I no longer belonged. And then I understood, very clearly, this wasn't just a sentence. If it had only been a slip of the tongue, someone would have rushed to correct it. If it were just postpartum stress, there would have been some awkwardness, some regret. But Emily's eyes, her step backward, and Daniel's silence all had the structure of something prearranged. It felt like a boundary already built, and I had stepped exactly where they wanted so they could push me out. I sat there and felt my heart beat slow. When the emotion settled, what remained wasn't anger. What remained were very concrete images, like numbers appearing on paper. I remembered every amount of money I had spent, not because I regretted it, but because I saw it as a chain of evidence of my own habits. College tuition, wedding expenses, the honeymoon, the down payment on this house, car repair bills, the times they were short on cash, the many "Dad will help you just this once" moments that always led to another. I even remembered the times I transferred money and then stared at my silent phone. No follow-up, no question asking, "Are you okay, Dad?" I had thought I was building a solid life for my child. But the more I remembered, the more I realized I had built it by erasing my own boundaries. I gave until giving became an expectation. I helped until help turned into entitlement. I opened the door too wide, and then I was surprised when people walked in without knocking. I leaned my head against the seat and closed my eyes for a few seconds. The words from the living room tried to force their way back in, but they were no longer sharp like before. They became a marker, a boundary post, a line I could finally see. When I opened my eyes, I noticed I was breathing out very slowly. My chest was still heavy, but my mind was different. I no longer wanted to argue. I no longer wanted to prove anything. I no longer wanted to chase acceptance. I saw one simple, clear, and cold truth. I had never set boundaries, so they never knew I had limits. The pain gradually turned into a clarity I couldn't remember feeling before. It didn't make me happy. It didn't make me light. But it made me stand upright inside. I sat there staring at the road ahead, and I heard my own voice in my head, strangely calm. "I'm not angry. I'm clear." That sentence wasn't meant to make me stronger. It was simply the truth. Anger makes people act impulsively. Clarity makes people do what's necessary. I looked at the house again, the house I once believed I could enter any time, because it was my daughter's home, because I had helped build it, because I had been there since Emily was little. That right had just been taken away in a single sentence. And in that moment, I understood something else, deeper and more frightening. If today they could look at me that way, then tomorrow they could treat everything I owned as a given, like a reward they already held in their hands, like an inheritance that belonged to them even while I was still alive. The word inheritance appeared in my mind, as clear as bold print. I already had a will. I had made it years ago when my health started showing small signs, when friends my age began talking about hospitals, strokes, and things people don't like to mention until it's too late. In that will, Emily was the primary heir, my only daughter. That had once felt like the most natural thing in the world. And precisely because it felt natural, I had never reviewed it, never questioned it, never imagined that one day Emily's name there could become a problem. I sat up straight. I placed my hand on my chest and felt my heartbeat steady. I wasn't thinking about hurting Emily. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking of one thing only. I could not allow someone who disrespected me to hold everything I had spent my entire life building and use it as a reward for ingratitude. I looked down at the phone resting in the console between the seats. The screen was dark. One touch would light it up. One call would start changing everything. I hesitated for exactly one beat, not out of fear, but because I understood that once I did this, there would be no easy way back. I reached out slowly, as if reaching for something heavier than the phone itself. My finger touched the screen. It lit up. In that small glow, I clearly saw the choice I was making. Then I opened my contacts. I stared at the list for a moment, then typed a name I had saved many years ago. Richard Hale, my family's attorney, the man who had helped me draft my will, arrange property documents, and handle the things people prefer not to think about until it's too late. My finger hovered over the call button. My heart was beating evenly now, no longer panicked. There was only a cold certainty. I pressed call. The phone rang once, then twice. I heard my own breathing inside the car. On the third ring, someone picked up. Hale's office. I spoke, calmer than I expected. "Is that Richard? It's James." A brief pause, then Richard's familiar, steady voice. "James, I'm listening. What's going on? You're calling at this hour, so it must not be routine." I stared straight ahead through the windshield, as if looking forward would keep me from being pulled back by emotion. "I need to revise my will, urgently." Richard didn't ask why right away. He said, slow and professional, "All right, when would you like to come in?" "I can come as soon as tomorrow, as early as possible." 9 a.m., can you make it?" "Yes." "James," Richard added, his voice softening slightly. "I'm asking just to be sure you're okay. What's making this so urgent?" I didn't go into detail. I said only what was necessary. "It's a family matter. I've thought it through. I want things changed." Richard was quiet for a few seconds, then replied, "I understand. I'll prepare the documents. See you tomorrow." I ended the call. The screen went dark again. I stayed in the car a little longer, but this time not because I was numb. I was letting the feeling of control return to where it belonged. Then I started the engine and drove home in a very different kind of silence. Not the silence of being pushed out, but the silence of someone who had decided not to stand outside his own life anymore. That night, I slept little, not because of pain. I lay in bed, watching the shadows of tree branches on the ceiling, thinking about what I would say the next morning. I didn't want to turn that meeting into a complaint. I wanted it clear, clean, unemotional. I also thought about what I had built. This house, my savings account, the small investments I had accumulated over time, things that didn't come naturally. They were the result of a lifetime of bending my back, from delivering newspapers in the cold to working late nights so Emily wouldn't lack anything. The next morning I arrived at Richard's office on time. The building stood on a quiet street, with a maple tree in front shedding its leaves. I parked, adjusted my collar, and went inside. The smell of paper and polished wood reminded me of previous visits when I had come with the mindset of a father preparing for his child's future. Today, I came with a different mindset. Richard stood and shook my hand. He was in his 60s, salt and pepper hair, sharp eyes, but not cold. "James, please come in." I followed him into his office. On the desk lay a brown folder with my name on the label. Richard sat down, opened it, and looked at me, waiting. I didn't circle around it. I said it directly. "I want to revise my will. I want to remove Emily as the primary heir." Richard didn't look shocked. He only frowned slightly, the frown of someone who understood the weight of the statement. "Do you want to reduce her share or remove her entirely?" "Entirely," I answered. Richard set his pen down and looked straight at me. "James, I have to ask again as procedure. Are you certain? Once you sign a new will, this decision is very difficult to reverse. If you later want to change it again, you'll need another will, and frequent changes can create disputes. And if she finds out, she may react." I nodded, meeting his gaze. "I'm certain." Richard slowly flipped through the pages, his voice steady. I need to be sure you're making this decision while fully lucid, without coercion or deception. Are you under any pressure? I gave a dry smile. No one is forcing me, I understand, and I choose. Richard nodded slightly, accepting that resolve. All right, then who would you like the assets transferred to? I had thought about this since the night before. I spoke clearly, word by word. I want most of it to go to a local community fund, the place where I volunteer. I want to establish a small scholarship for children in need. I also want to leave a portion to my sister and her children. They're the ones who still see me as a person, not a wallet. Richard wrote things down, occasionally looking up to confirm. And your house? I want it to belong to that fund after I pass, if they accept it. If not, sell it and put the money into the scholarship. Richard paused. Do you want to leave anything at all to Emily? A symbolic amount to avoid claims of omission? I looked down at the desk, then back at him. My voice wasn't loud, but it was solid as stone. No. Richard didn't press further. He left a few seconds of silence, as if giving me a chance to take it back. But I didn't. I felt a sentence waiting inside me, and when I said it, it made me lighter. I built these things with my entire life, I said, and she doesn't deserve to touch what I built with my entire life. Those words didn't come from anger. They came from truth. I didn't want my legacy in the hands of someone who could look at me, her father, and call me that without blinking. Richard nodded slowly. I understand. He explained the necessary steps, that the new will would fully replace the old one, that he would add clauses to reduce the risk of disputes, that I would need to sign in front of witnesses and have it notarized properly. I listened. I nodded. I agreed. No hesitation, no retreat. We reviewed each section. Every place Emily's name appeared, Richard crossed it out and wrote a new name or an organization. It felt strange, like pulling a thorn from skin I had endured for too long. Not painless, but freeing. When Richard closed the folder and said, I'll prepare the final version for you to sign in the next few days, I leaned back and exhaled. For the first time since yesterday, my chest didn't feel crushed. Not because I was happy about the severing, but because I knew I had given myself back something I had lost, the right to decide. Before I stood to leave, Richard looked at me, his voice gentler. James, I have to say this, not as your lawyer, but as someone your age. You seem very calm. I nodded. I'm not angry, I said. I'm clear. I stepped out of the office into the morning sunlight. A light breeze moved through the trees. I stood on the steps for a moment, feeling my feet firmly on the ground. I no longer felt pushed out. I was standing exactly where I belonged, in my own life, and that relief, even without brightness, was enough for me to know I had done what needed to be done. I didn't tell Emily about the will. I didn't send a message to provoke her. I didn't want to turn it into a war of words. I had seen enough. Some things, the more you explain, the more you give others a chance to twist the story to suit themselves. I didn't want to go another round in the cycle I had lived in for years. I chose silence. I drove home and lived my days as usual, but something had changed. I no longer initiated calls to check in. I no longer sent messages asking, "Do you need anything?" I let the phone lie still. If Emily texted, I replied politely, to the point, without emotion. If Emily called, I answered, but I didn't try to prolong the conversation. I didn't act angry. I simply withdrew my presence, the way someone pulls their hand away from a hot stove after being burned. And I also cut off the thing I had once considered a natural responsibility, financial support. Before, all it took was Emily saying, "We're a little tight," and I would understand and transfer money on my own. I never demanded detailed explanations. I never said, "Handle it yourselves." I had played the role of their life preserver for far too long. But after that afternoon in the living room, I understood that the life preserver wasn't saving anyone from drowning. It was teaching them that they could kick me into the water and still be pulled back to shore. In the first few weeks, Emily didn't react much. Maybe she was busy with the baby. Maybe she thought I was just being sensitive and would calm down. I also heard bits and pieces through acquaintances that Emily was still telling people everything was fine, that I was busy and hadn't come over yet. I didn't correct it. I had no need to prove I was a victim. Then, just as I expected, the messages started to change in tone. One evening, Emily texted, "Dad, we have to pay to fix the heating system. Can you help?" I read it, put the phone down, then picked it up again. Before, I would have transferred the money immediately. This time, I replied with 2 words. "I can't," Emily replied almost instantly. "Why can't you? Just this once." I answered briefly. "I can't." No explanation, no argument. I didn't want to turn it into a long story. I also didn't bring up what she had said in the living room. I let Emily hear her own words echo back in the silence. In the weeks that followed, she tried different approaches, sometimes soft. "Dad, I'm exhausted. The baby is up all night. Daniel is under work pressure. Can you help me a little?" Sometimes accusatory. "You've been strange lately. What are you doing?" Sometimes invoking duty. "Family is supposed to help each other, Dad." I kept the same kind of replies, short, polite, not opening the door for emotions to flood in. "I can't. I'm not able to help. I'm busy. I have things to do." The more I responded that way, the more clearly I heard the change in Emily. Her voice grew tighter. Her messages got longer. There were more exclamation points, more lines saying I was unreasonable. I read them, but I didn't let them pull me in. I was no longer the one who had to smooth things over to keep the peace. Time passed. 6 months. 6 months is long enough for a broken habit to reveal its true core. You can't keep pretending you're calling because you miss someone when you've grown used to calling because you need something. And I realized something else too. When I stopped giving, my life didn't collapse. It settled. I volunteered at the community center more often. I taught a few kids how to build small wooden shelves, fix wobbly chairs, measure and cut boards. I came home with the smell of wood on my hands, with the feeling that I was still useful, but useful in the right place. Then, one afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch drinking tea, my phone vibrated. Emily's name. I looked at the screen, hesitated for a beat, then answered, because I recognized the vibration wasn't like the previous requests for money. It was urgent. It was tight. It carried panic. "Dad!" Emily didn't greet me. Her voice was higher than usual, shaking with alarm. "What did you do to the will?" I didn't ask how she found out. I looked at the street in front of my house where a car passed and disappeared around the corner. I answered calmly. "I changed it." "That's impossible," Emily nearly shouted. "You can't do that. Who told you? Who put you up to this?" I heard Daniel somewhere in the background, his voice fragmented, as if asking what was going on. Emily didn't hide it, didn't care. She just wanted an answer immediately, as if she had just discovered the floor beneath her feet had been pulled away. "No one put me up to it," I said. "I did it myself." Emily was breathing fast. "Why? Are you crazy? I'm your daughter. I'm your only one. Who are you leaving it to?" "Strangers?" I kept my voice even. "I'm leaving it to where it belongs." "Belongs?" Emily let out a dry laugh. "Are you punishing me over something stupid? That day I just told you not to hold the baby. The baby was still small. I was worried. I said that because I was stressed." Hearing her say, "just told you not to hold the baby," felt strange. It was like someone trying to rewrite reality by renaming it. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke slowly, clearly, like hammering in nails one by one. Emily, you wouldn't let me touch my grandchild. Then you also don't get to touch the inheritance. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Emily changed her tone immediately, fast, like a swimmer grabbing for anything to stay afloat. Dad, I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't think you'd take it this seriously. You know, I had just given birth, hormones, I was afraid of germs, I was scared. You know I don't hate you. I closed my eyes for a second. I didn't hate Emily. I also didn't want to hear apologies that only surfaced when someone feared losing what they believed was theirs. If Emily had called me that day after I got home, if she had said, "Dad, I was wrong," if she had asked, "Are you okay?" maybe everything would have been different. But 6 months of silence, followed by a panicked call about the will, it said too much. "Do you remember what you said?" I asked quietly. Emily paused, then spoke quickly. "I remember, but you have to understand. I didn't mean—" "You did mean it," I cut in, not loudly but firmly. And Daniel stood there, silent. No one corrected it. No one apologized. You let me walk out like someone not worth keeping. Emily's breathing grew faster. "Dad, I was wrong. What do you want me to do?" "I'll let you see the baby. I'll—" Hearing the word will felt hollow. She was promising like she was bargaining, as if letting me have a few minutes with my grandchild would make everything return to how it was. But I wasn't there anymore. "I don't need negotiations," I said. "I need respect, and you chose not to give me that." "But doing this destroys the family," Emily almost screamed. "You're embarrassing me, making me feel unsafe. You can't—" I looked at the teacup in my hand and saw the liquid ripple gently with my heartbeat. I set the cup down on the small table. My hand wasn't shaking. I saw clearly the difference between that day and today. That day, I was pushed out of my daughter's house, unable to speak. Today, I was standing in my own life, saying what needed to be said. "I've decided," I said, "and it's already been done legally." Emily choked up. I heard her voice on the verge of tears, then on the verge of anger. But I didn't wait. I had heard enough. "Dad," Emily said, her voice breaking. "Goodbye, Emily," I replied. And I ended the call. After I hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time. Not because I was afraid of what I'd done, but because I wanted to be sure I hadn't spoken impulsively. A light breeze passed through, making the wind chime in the corner of the porch ring softly. That sound usually soothed me, but that day it felt like a period, a final punctuation mark on the years I had spent trying to hold everything together by enduring. The phone lay still, no callback, no long apologetic message, no explanations. Emily disappeared into silence the same way she had chosen from the beginning, only I wasn't chasing after it to fill the gap. In the days that followed, I waited for some reaction, even though I knew I shouldn't. I wondered if she would come by, stand at the door, knock once like she used to when she was young and wanted to make peace. But no. My house was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen, the refrigerator cycling on, birds landing on the fence. Emily was completely silent. And strangely, I didn't fall apart. There was a time when just a few hours without a reply from Emily made me anxious, made me imagine everything, made me blame myself for saying something wrong. I had lived like someone who always had to beg for a little attention to prove he still had a place. But now, as the silence stretched on, I began to see something I had never dared to look at before. I had grown accustomed to the noise of giving. When that noise stopped, I could finally hear myself. I began living for myself, not in a flashy or selfish way, but simply. I reclaimed my mornings. I woke early, brewed coffee the way I liked it, sat on the porch watching sunlight touch the lawn. No rush, no need to check my phone. Some days I just sat and breathed, as if learning how not to wait for a call. I returned to the community center more regularly. At first, I only meant to stop by a few times to distract myself, but then the faces there became familiar. The volunteers greeted me by name. The receptionist remembered I liked my tea without sugar. And in the corner of the activity room, there was a group of kids who always looked into the small woodworking shop like it was a secret world. I had done some basic woodworking when I was younger. I wasn't a professional, but I knew how to measure, how to saw, how to drive nails at the right angle so a shelf wouldn't tilt. The center had some old tools, a thick wooden table, and a storage corner with leftover boards. One day, the manager asked if I could show the kids how to make a few simple things. I nodded. On the first day, I stood in front of those kids, ruler in hand, with a strange feeling, like stepping back into Emily's classroom years ago. Except now, I was no longer a father trying to prove he was lovable. I was just an old man who knew how to make a few things with his hands. I started with very simple projects: a small bookshelf, a pencil box, a name plaque for a door. I taught them how to measure properly, how to mark with a pencil, how to keep their hands away from the saw blade. I talked more about patience than technique. I told them, working with wood is like life. Cut a little wrong and the whole line is off, but what matters is seeing it and adjusting. The kids listened. Some fidgeted. Some asked endless questions. Some stayed quiet, but their eyes lit up whenever they held something they had made themselves. Each time they finished, they smiled, held up their project like a trophy. I felt something warm return inside me. Not longing. Meaning. I also started using money differently. Before, I wrote checks to Emily out of reflex. Now I wrote checks to the neighborhood soup kitchen, to the center's small scholarship fund, to a school supply program. I didn't show it off. I didn't want thanks. I just found it strange how, when money goes to the right place, it feels clean. It doesn't come with expectation. It doesn't come with fear of being looked down on. One afternoon, just as I stepped into the center, I heard the sound of feet pounding down the hallway. A group of kids came running like a gust of wind. One curly-haired boy ran fastest, lifted his hand like a wave and shouted loudly, his voice echoing through the lobby. "Grandpa!" I froze. My heart gave a small, sharp twist, then softened. The other kids laughed and called out too. "Grandpa James! Grandpa James!" They grabbed my sleeves, pulling me toward the workshop like they were dragging a family member home. I looked at their faces and saw excitement that wasn't fake. They didn't need me for money. They needed me because I showed up, because I listened, because I taught them a skill and praised them at the right moment. I bent down, ruffled the curly-haired boy's hair, and a real smile broke across my face, not forced. And in that moment, I realized something I had forgotten for far too long. I still had value. My value didn't lie in bank transfers. It didn't lie in fixing other people's problems. It lay in being a decent human being, someone who could make others feel seen, able to learn, able to believe in themselves. I had thought only Emily could give me the role of father, of grandfather. But that role, it turned out, wasn't just a title. It was the way you exist in other people's lives. I no longer held the hot resentment toward Emily. Sometimes I was still sad, still felt a hollow ache when I thought of the grandchild I had never held. But that sadness no longer dragged me down. It just reminded me that some losses don't need to turn into poison. I didn't need hatred to be strong. I just needed clarity to be at peace. At night, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a small notebook where I wrote down things to do. I noted my volunteer schedule, listed materials to buy for the woodworking class, jotted down a few ideas for the scholarship fund. I could see myself building a different life, one that didn't revolve around whether my daughter accepted me or not. And when I closed the notebook, I knew I was preparing myself for an ending. Not a tragic ending, but the end of a time when I lived on the hope that giving enough would buy love. Now I understood love can't be bought, and neither can respect. I just wanted my remaining years to pass in peace, with people who called me Grandpa sincerely, not out of obligation. I lived the rest of my days in a peace I hadn't known was possible. No tense phone calls, no late-night messages asking for help and then disappearing. Emily didn't reach out again. I didn't seek her out either. Not out of anger, but because I understood that some distances can only be closed if both sides want to step forward. I didn't force it. I didn't cling. I let everything stand where it belonged. I had no regrets. I wasn't seeking revenge. I simply placed my legacy back where it could create real value. The money I had saved over a lifetime was now nurturing children with a chance at education. The wooden boards I bought became the first bookshelf for a child who had never believed they could make anything with their hands. The afternoons at the community center passed slowly, slow enough for me to hear laughter and feel fully alive. People asked me if I was sad about not being a grandfather the way I had once dreamed. I answered honestly. I was sad, but I was no longer in pain. Sadness no longer defined me. It was just a part of life, like a healed scar. I still thought of my grandchild, but I didn't let that longing pull me back to a place where respect didn't exist. I chose to be present where I was seen as a human being. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real-life situations and human experiences. It does not encourage any extreme actions, nor does it target any specific individual or organization. What I want to say through this story is simple. Family bonds do not give anyone the right to hurt you. Giving does not mean enduring, and boundaries are not selfish. They are respect for yourself. If you are in a relationship that makes you feel smaller, disrespected, or mistreated, seek support. Talk to someone you trust. Reach out to a professional when needed. And most importantly, set boundaries to protect yourself. You don't have to prove your worth by sacrificing yourself to exhaustion. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. If it resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Sharing this story might help someone who needs to be reminded that they are not alone. Wherever you are, remember this. Your value is not measured by how much you give, but by how you are treated, and you deserve that respect.